Hey, what's up? This is Jay Evans, and you are listening to the Jay Evans Podcast. Today, I want to talk about how I fight depression. One thing that I wanted to do in 2019 was to be more open about depression. It's something I have fought. I think that's the best way to put it. It is something I have fought and struggled with for close to 10 years now. I'd say right around 10 years. And you see so many people on the news, and it comes, I think Robin Williams is the biggest one, that he killed himself. And it comes as such a shock because it's like, man, I had no idea what that person was dealing with. And not every case of depression is that extreme. But I think there's a lot of symptoms that people are unaware of when it comes to depression, that when we're aware of them, we can be very helpful to the people that are dealing with depression. Because one thing that I notice is people think depression is just being sad or down in the dumps. And it may not always be that. Yeah, those may be symptoms, but that's not always the case. So, going into today's podcast, I did a poll on Instagram. I've got some statistics pulled up. I've got some Bible verses pulled up as we talk about depression. And even if you're not a Christian, even if you're not even depressed, I'm sure you know people in your lives that deal with depression. So I'm hoping that this podcast today will be an encouragement to you and will give you value. All right, so the Anxiety and Depression Association of America says this: anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting 40 million adults in the United States age 18 and older, or 18% of the population every year. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, yet only 36.9% of those suffering receive treatment. Here's one thing that, just straight out the gate, really makes me mad. Is the assumption that if you're depressed, there's something wrong. And I will preface it with saying this. There are a lot of people out there, sadly, Christians, that say, there's no scientific evidence that antidepressants work. If you're depressed, it means there's unconfessed sin in your life. Or my favorite, you just need to declare over yourself that by his stripes we are healed. As I read through Job, what we see is we can go through seasons that are just awful. And God is doing something in those seasons, but he doesn't owe us an explanation. And it may be that God has allowed this to happen because he's continuing to shape and mold us. But if you are depressed and you're listening to this, I just want you to know that, sometimes it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. That is what I discovered was the case for me. I was diagnosed, almost, I want to say a year or two ago now. It was 2 years ago. So, here's the backstory of when I finally came to the point where I needed help. And I probably should have opened the podcast with this, but, this is how we do it. I had gotten married in May 14th, 2016. Was it 2016? 2017? 2018? I don't know. That sounds terrible. I know it was May 14th. But, okay, so got married in May, started recording an album at the beginning of June, and then in the middle of June, my grandpa passed away. And so in the middle of this process, I'm adjusting to the married life. My grandpa has passed away. I'm gone every weekend recording this album. And then I think it was in July or August, I was also playing a wedding gig that was kind of stressful. And one day I was at work, and again at this point I had been wrestling with depression for a long time. And one day at work, I just broke. Like, somebody asked me to do something, and it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I look back now and laugh. I just, like, something in me just went off. And I just walked out and got in my car, and I said, I was having a panic attack before this happened. I just snapped. I'm having like an anxiety attack, and my wife was, I couldn't get a hold of her, and I get in the car and I go to my parents' house. I talk with my dad, and I said, Dad, I'm just burned out. I'm burned out. And so him being good friends with my pastor, who I was working for at the time, just came to him and told him everything that was going off, and he said, hey, just take the time off that you need. And that was that was good. But the way I spent the time was literally sitting in darkness in my apartment, wanting to do nothing. Like, literally nothing. I would sit on the couch and read the Bible and beg God to take this away from me and ask him why I felt this way. And it came to the point, I don't even remember who suggested it. I want to say it was my wife, but I'm not positive. It just said, you know what? Maybe it's time that you go see a doctor. And I went to the doctor, and they do, I don't even know what the tests are called. There's 2 tests they do where you answer questions and they determine whether or not you're depressed. And come to find out, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And, you know, after about a month of taking antidepressants, I found that they worked. And the 2 biggest things for me, I'll say the 2 biggest things that changed after I started taking antidepressants, I was way less irritable. Like, not even the same as I was. And it was easier to get out of bed in the morning. When I am really struggling with depression, and I still do, I still have, over Christmas break, looking back, was probably the worst struggle I've had with depression since I first started taking antidepressants. And I fought through it, and I feel better now. But the antidepressants helped. And that's not the case with everybody, but it helped me. And sometimes it's not even clinical depression. Maybe, you have a loved one that passes away, and you need to take antidepressants for a little while, and maybe you need to talk to your doctor about that. But for me, it was something that I've been struggling with for years and years, since I was in middle school, and eventually got to the point. And I hope that you don't get to that point. That if you see that, hey, if it's been a year and you're still depressed, go talk to a doctor. And I was fortunate enough, I know some people have some problems with antidepressants, like they can mess with your mind. I got super lucky. The first antidepressants that I took helped. And that's not always the case. And maybe what you need is counseling. And I want to say this. I've been taking antidepressants for 2 years now. I feel better. I definitely feel better than I did 2 years ago, as of today. And I want to say this. My depression hasn't gotten better. I've just gotten better at fighting it. Because I don't fight it alone. My wife and I have a super simple system. And here's a tip for how you can help people in your life that have depression. Is I just say to her, we don't overcomplicate it. I say, I'm struggling today. And she knows what that means. My wife has struggled with depression before, so she understands. And she just knows that maybe that day she just needs to be a little bit more gentle with me, a little bit more patient, a little more understanding. But also that I need a shove. I just need to get up. I need to get moving, that I can't stay down in the dumps. So let me see. I ran an Instagram poll, and I said, help me out with the podcast, yada, yada, yada. So I asked, what affects you the most when you're depressed? One person said productivity. Somebody said finding motivation to do things. Somebody said attitude towards others and getting out of bed. Somebody said attitude and getting out of bed. Somebody said, I just wake up feeling sad for the entire day or two. Doesn't happen often. So I asked, do you struggle with depression? 16 people said yes. 7 people said no. Here's one thing to not do to the people in your life that are depressed. There were people, I'm just going to come out and say this, at my last church that knew that I was wrestling with depression, but treated me as if I just had a crappy attitude and was, a lazy bum. Because my two biggest things are when I'm having a bad day with depression, I cannot get motivated. I'm not motivated, and I am not interested in anything. So I would have people that would get mad at me, knowing I'm going through this, and act like I was doing it on purpose, like I was lazy or whatever. So one thing you could do for the people in your life that are depressed, just ask them, when you are down in the dumps, how does it affect you the most? And then you can say, how can I help you? Because like me, the biggest thing I need when I'm depressed is I just need you to be patient with me. I need you to understand that I have no desire, literally no desire to do anything. So when people understand that, they say, okay, I'm gonna be a little bit more gentle, but it's not okay to stay there. That's the biggest thing. It's not okay to stay there. Instead of getting mad, instead of judging, and maybe you're looking and you're saying, hey, maybe I'm depressed because I have bouts. Maybe I don't feel super sad. I mean, and that's the case with some people. Some people are depressed. They just feel like crying all the time. That is a symptom. But for some people, the symptom is just no motivation, no interest in anything. And maybe you hear this and you say, oh, wow, maybe I'm depressed. Or you could say, you know what? I have a friend, and maybe that's the case with them. Ask them, how can I help you when you're struggling? How can I be an encouragement to you? How can I help you get motivated? Whatever. Because the dumbest thing is just like, people are like, oh, well, just stop being depressed. Okay. If it were that easy, I would have tried that 5-6 years ago. Because I have spent countless hours praying, and I still pray about it. But there comes a time where you say, you know what? I need to do something. And the last thing I will say is I just want to emphasize this because I feel like there's such a stigma around depression. Don't be like Job's friends. The book of Job in the Bible is about this guy, and God allows terrible things to happen to him. And basically the book teaches that good things happen to people and bad things happen to people, and God does not owe you an explanation. He doesn't. I hate to break it to you, he doesn't. And you see in this book, Job has probably some of the worst friends in the Bible because they're like, oh, clearly you've done something wrong, and this is why all of these bad things are happening to you. And sadly, some people have friends like that, but just don't be like that. Be patient with people who have depression. It doesn't mean that they're on bad terms with God. I mean, you look at the Psalms, and there's like 67 Psalms of lament. The lament Psalms are cries of despair, anger, protest, doubt, and they feature regularly in the Psalms and are not something that biblical writers or God himself were ashamed to put into Holy Scripture. They may be an embarrassment to some Christians, but they are a normal part of Israel's praise and worship, which is what Psalms were all about. And so maybe from this podcast, maybe what you took out of it is maybe you say, you know what, I need some help fighting through this. And maybe you need to go see a doctor. Maybe you need to go see a counselor. Or maybe you think of a friend, you say, maybe they have depression, I just haven't been sensitive to that. Just because you have depression doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It might mean you need help. It might mean, you need somebody to walk alongside of you. Don't fight depression alone. For me, I've realized that, you know what, keeping my struggle with depression, as of right now, I mean, I like 2 weeks ago told my coworkers for the first time. I mean, there's probably less than 20 people that know I struggle with depression. This is the first time I've ever come out and told anybody that I've just been open to say, hey, I take antidepressants. This is the first time I've ever just come out and said it. Because I want to help people. I want people to know that, just because you're depressed doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean especially that you're a bad Christian. It means that this is your struggle. This could be something you struggle with for 10 years. It could be something you struggle with for the rest of your life. But you are not alone. God is for you. He's placed people in your life to speak life into you. And listen to those people. I hope today this podcast was an encouragement to you. I hope that it inspires you to take action. Whatever side of the depression battle you're on, whether you have it or somebody you love has it. I hope that it's helpful. If you have any input, any comments, questions, DM me on Instagram, Captain J Evans, or comment on the podcast. Thanks for listening.